Go for it.
Okay, so the glomerulus is where you're making the filtrate. It goes into the Bowman's capsule here, and then it flows into the proximal convoluted tubule, descending limb of the loop of Henle, ascending limb of the loop of Henle, and then the distal convoluted tubule, and finally the collecting duct.
Okay.
That's what this picture is showing, just in a more spread out stick figure kind of way. Here, surrounding it, this is, if you say just took this piece and blew it up, what you see here is the tube itself. So that's where the filtrate is. So like say it's this right here. Surrounding it are the peritubular cells, so they'd be all around in a circle. And then the peritubular capillaries are just outside of those cells.
Okay.
So anything that moves from the blood to be secreted into the filtrate has to go through the cell, and anything being reabsorbed from the filtrate to the blood has to go through the cell.
Okay.
So here, what this is talking about here is that you have countertransport of sodium and potassium. So sodium is being put into the cell while potassium is going out of the cell. And these are their natural gradients of the way those ions want to move. Sodium always wants to go in, potassium always wants to go out.
Okay.
But what happens here now is that you have too much sodium in the cell, and you don't really want that to happen, so you end up doing the sodium-potassium pump, where you kick sodium out of the cell and you drag potassium into the cell.
Okay.
So this is against the gradient.
Active transport, or is
Yep.
that considered
The-
counter-transport?
It's an active transport that is also countertransport. So it's
You wouldn't
countertransport using ATP.
Okay.
More just call it active transport. You know, it's moving
Alright.
them against their gradients.
Okay.
So that's how you keep your sodium and your potassium in line. This is also why when you reabsorb sodium, remember how when we were doing the endocrine system,
Yeah.
you said if you reabsorb sodium, you end up losing potassium? This is why. So you're ending up urinating away your potassium. Carbon dioxide that's in the filtrate also just diffuses into the cell, turns into carbonic acid, which then turns into bicarbonate and hydrogen.
Okay.
Then we're stuck with bicarbonate and hydrogen in the cell. We want to get the hydrogen out. We do that with countertransport with sodium again. So again, sodium moving into the cell, hydrogen going into the filtrate.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the bicarbonate is going to have this hamburger shift or the chloride shift where you exchange bicarbonate for chlorine. So you're throwing bicarbonate out of the cell into the blood while pulling chlorine into the cell from the blood. These things are going to help you regulate pH. So if you step up this carrier, you're getting rid of a lot of hydrogen, which helps you to raise your pH.
Okay.
And also if you step up this carrier, you're reabsorbing a lot of bicarbonate, which also helps you raise your pH.
Okay.
So these two things are how you regulate your pH. The next one is a sodium, potassium, 2-chlorine carrier. So basically potassium and chlorine are hitching a ride with the sodium gradient. So sodium wants to move into the cell, potassium and chlorine are just going with it.
Okay.
So now they're in the cell. Now we have too much potassium, sodium, and chlorine in the cell, so we want to fix that. This is a sodium chlorine pump. Gets rid of the sodium and chlorine, puts them into the blood so they're reabsorbed.
Okay.
This here, again, to get rid of more sodium, we have the sodium potassium pump, just like we did over here.
Yeah.
And then because we have all this excess potassium in now, its natural gradient is to move out, counter-transporting itself with sodium.
Okay.
And meanwhile, water will be moving in whichever direction, depending on
awesome.
which part is hypertonic versus hypotonic. You know, so wherever the salt is, basically water will move towards it through little pores called aquaporins.
Okay.
And then this is like the big view of that. So this would be, we're ignoring the cells to keep it simple, just the net movement of those ions, of what happens like in the proximal convoluted tubule, which is right there, and then the descending limb, which is there, ascending limb,
Ascending limb,
et cetera.
Okay.
So this is pretty self-explanatory right here. These are just the things that are going on mainly in the proximal convoluted tubule. The loop of Henle is a bit more complicated because you've got these thick segments where you have these two carriers going on, and then the thin segment where you only have water movement. So what happens here is you have the NAK2Cl carrier. You're reabsorbing sodium, potassium, and chlorine into the cells around. Remember that the potassium is being put back into the filtrate pretty much right away from the cell. It doesn't go
Yeah.
back into the blood. It's going right into the filtrate. But the sodium and the chlorine get put in the peritubular fluid in the blood around the tube. Then there's this capillary that runs parallel called the vasa recta. And what the vasa recta does is it grabs that sodium and chlorine and it pulls it down here around the thin segment.
Okay.
All that salt, basically, just sucks the water out of the thin segment. Just pulls it, so you're reabsorbing all the water from down here. This makes it really concentrated on its way up, because there's not a lot of water, which makes the sodium really want to move out of the filtrate into the cell, so it increases the gradient. So the vasorecta has even more salt to pull down here, makes us even more concentrated, and on and on and on.
Okay.
What you call that huge amount of salt down here is the medullary concentration gradient. And the fact that all these things are running in opposite direction and creating this medullary concentration gradient is called the countercurrent multiplication.
Okay.
Does anything happen? Does anything really happen in the descending loop of Henle, like in terms of ion movement?
It's the same as in the sixth segment of the ascending loop, but I just put it on the ascending loop because I didn't
So
want to clutter the
they
picture.
they both go into the vasorecta, and the vasorecta pulls it down to the bottom.
Yes,
okay.
yeah. So
All right.
both are happening in the
At the same time, like,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
That's really. But
It's really complicated making.
but on the, descending loop, it hasn't really become super concentrated. yet,
I will
right?
put
What?
it in
On the descending loop, it wouldn't
YouTube, then
become
I will
super
send you the link.
concentrated yet.
No, it's the ascending limb that gets super
Super
concentrated.
Okay.
Yeah, and